Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the webinar on Best Practices, Introduction to Working with a Co-Packer. My name is Dolores Serafin, and I work for Alberta Agriculture and Forestry with the Sector Development section. I will be your host for today's webinar. Before we start, here are a few housekeeping items. If you would like to ask a question, please type it into the question area on your GoToWebinar panel. The panel is on the right-hand side of your screen. The presenter will address all of the questions at the end of this presentation. Also, this webinar is being recorded for your viewing pleasure. A link will be sent to you in an email after the live webinar. We are anticipating approximately 45 minutes of presentation time, which will leave us lots of time for questions and answers. This webinar will be an introduction for food, beverage, and natural health product businesses looking to utilize the services of a co-packer to increase production values or meet market requirements. Hear general information on co-packing and how to determine if you are ready for these services. Learn about resources available for the industry and some tips for starting this relationship off right. Our speakers today are Lindsay Sutton and Marguerite Thiessen. Lindsay is a market development specialist with the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. Since 2003, she has helped Alberta food processors access market channels for their products within Canada and globally by coaching, mentoring, and by providing strategic business planning. Her passion is partnering with food companies to see them flourish and has had the privilege of helping hundreds of Alberta products enter and expand into grocery and food service channels domestically. Marguerite Thiessen works with Alberta Agriculture and Forestry Sector Development section in the role of the Value Chain Specialist. She has been with the department for over 30 years. Marguerite is part of the domestic marketing team who supports Alberta food entrepreneurs and food processors with the expertise to navigate, grow, and succeed in multiple domestic market channels. Marguerite facilitates connections and partnerships for business collaboration, provides coaching, resources, and tools to enable food businesses to expand or enter new markets. Lindsay and Marguerite, over to both of you to share your expertise with us.
Thank you, Dolores, and good morning, everyone. Lindsay and I receive calls and requests on a regular basis from people who are seeking help with expansion or development of their production. One thing we also have heard from the co-packers is that there's a need to help these companies prepare for working with a co-packer, which ties right into our webinar today. The right fit matters when you are working with a co-packer. There we go. Little technical glitch already, first thing in the morning. Our goal for the webinar today is to provide you with information to know what's involved in co-packing, how to be ready to engage with a co-packer, how to find a co-packer when you're ready, and provide an overview of the best practices. We've divided the topics into defining co-packing and a co-packer, when to use a co-packer, common benefits and challenges, considerations when choosing a co-packer, best practice tips, and resources. You will also notice that as we go along, a divider slide will pop up to indicate we are moving on to the next topic. So defining a the co-packing and co-packer. Industry uses terms like co-packing, co-manufacturing, toll processing, contract manufacturing, co-processing, and custom manufacturing. And so if you hear those terms in conversations, it all relates to the co-packing topic. A co-packer is a business capable of producing and packaging products for other companies, and these business owners can be a processor with excess capacity who is offering their services to other companies, or a co-packer can also be a business who's solely involved in co-packing services. Co-packers can manufacture, package, palletize, and warehouse your products, as well as provide services to formulate recipes, design your package label, or help you with shipping. In co-packing, the client owns the recipe and the co-packer does the manufacturing. So when should we use a co-packer? Some common reasons we would use a co-packer is you're already in the market, you're selling your product, Maybe a food service buyer or retail buyer is interested in your branded product. You're anticipating that you need more volumes because your sales have increased. Your product is relatively easy to produce and could fit nicely into a co-packing um, system. You require food safety or specific certifications that the co-packer can help you achieve. Maybe you want to sell out of Alberta, or you want to start exporting to another country, or your business model is supporting a growth model and moving to co-packing is the right choice for you. And then you may not want to use a co-packer if your product is too niche. So if your product requires that you source ingredients or limitations on specific allergens, this could increase the reasons that finding a co-packer may not work for your business. So that's what we mean by your product is too niche. Maybe you have small production runs that aren't feasible for certain co-packers, and then that would be a reason not to choose a co-packer. Maybe you're not yet ready to support the costs of co-packing in your business model. Maybe you need to get to the market fast, and working on that relationship with a co-packer might not be the right timing. Or maybe you don't like to change anything about your recipe, and sometimes when you're adapting to go to increase volumes, you do need to adapt your recipe. Or maybe it requires you to source products from another source. So we find there are different benefits for choosing a co-packing route, but we also realize that there are some common challenges involved in finding co-packing in Alberta. So reducing costs. So it might help you reduce costs related to if you had to build your own facility, buy your own equipment, or hire employees. Providing you with certifications like federal, provincial, and municipal regulations. And some co-packers are great mentors, and they'll help you increase your understanding of the costs and procedures in processing. So when you're ready to ramp up and maybe move into your own facility, you'll have all that understanding under your belt. Reducing the lead time in getting your product to market is a benefit. The potential of bulk purchasing for ingredients and packaging with your co-packer partner is often a benefit. The co-packer may already have an existing distribution relationship, and you might be able to piggyback on that. Having that expertise for quality assurance, formulation of a raw product, and final product testing is also a benefit. And then in the end, if you're working with a co-packer, you have more time that you can devote to your own business management, marketing, and sales. So challenges. Often a co-packer has only a tight window of production time available for other products. So you'll need to determine if the production time fits your needs. Cost could be high given you're paying in the services for the use of the equipment, the staff, cleaning, and storage at the co-packers. And short production runs can be very expensive. High volumes are often required by co-packers if it's helping them be more cost efficient. So you really need to take a look at whether the co-packer will work for you and your needs if you are a low minimum volume production run. Loss of control. Sometimes you have to find compromises when you're working with a co-packer that maybe you wouldn't have to do if you're just working by yourself in your own company. And then ensure that the co-packer standards of doing business align with your own values and standards. And another thing to keep in mind that is a challenge is the co-packer could be producing some of your competing products in the same facility. And then you have to clearly discuss expectations and any issues arising because there are often communication breakdowns involved in co-processing. So considerations when choosing a co-packer, I am going to turn this section over to Lindsay.
Great, thank you, Marguerite. So I like to equate a co-packing relationship as sort of a marriage. And with that marriage, it's important to perhaps understand a little bit about yourself and sort of what you're looking for with that partnership. So all joking aside, it's really important, and that's what we find with our clients that we work with who are looking and seeking co-packers, is that they don't often take the time to know their own products and processes. So what I mean by that is just really understanding, what they need exactly and coming up with clear expectations around that. So really understanding that is important to going forward. So that's sort of the first step, I would say. Maybe understand thyself before you seek others. So understanding the volume. So do you know what your run size is that you want to be, and sort of those anticipated annual volumes? So that's going to be important when you're talking to that co-packer, especially that annual volumes will be important, and perhaps how often you want those volumes to happen. Many of the clients perhaps, and I would hope, have a good relationship with the retailer or food service provider, and they have an idea of those anticipated volumes. So it's an important thing to sort of know about as well. And really understanding your cost of goods is vital, regardless if you're seeking a co-packer, but for sure when you're looking at doing some co-pack services or seeking co-packing services, knowing your cost of goods in and out, plus the margins that you need to get into new marketplaces, being honest with yourself about that so you know all the ins and outs. And with that, knowing your sale price. So knowing what your wholesale price to the buyer and the retailer will be. So that's definitely a place where people don't love to look. They don't really want to find out and dig into their price, but it's vital for anyone to look at their cost of goods. So don't undermine that, and definitely know that when you're going to be basically extending processing to a co-packer, which could be costly. So with that, other things to know are your packaging requirements and knowing the exact type, size of packaging that you want your product to be, the type of, is it glass? Is it going to go into plastic? Some co-processors or co-packers won't allow glass into their facilities, so that's an important thing to know. So knowing what your equipment requirements will be in the processes. So I understand we don't know everything about every piece of equipment out there. Some processing equipment is quite refined. However, still having an idea of the types of equipment and processes required to make your product is really important. So if you need a certain type of steam kettle, or if you require a certain type of deep frying, that's going to be important to know what you need. And with that, sort of these ingredients that you're sourcing, so the availability of that ingredient. If your ingredients are difficult to source, that might be challenging for that co-packer, and really looking at the types that you require. And then as Marguerite mentioned, it's allowing for some space to be a bit more open on the types of ingredients you may use, because you might not be able to use the same ingredients, because perhaps at a different scale you can't use that beautiful garlic that you source, for instance. So be sure that you list anything that's sort of hard to source. And of course, with that, perhaps you're seeking co-packing because of certifications that you require and that you perhaps don't want to do on your own. So that could be kosher, halal, or organic. So being clear on those things that you need. And allergens definitely come into place of what allergens perhaps are in your product, as well as those allergens that you want to avoid in your product. So you can probably see that if you're working with a co-packer that does have mustard and that is an allergen you don't want in your product, then that could be a challenge. So just getting to know what you want and setting those expectations is so important when you start off. So if you start off those expectations, you sort of can narrow down what you're looking for. So step 2 would be sort of planning your needs. So looking at, I know this checklist might be hard to see, but we'll provide a lot of these checklists and action plans at the end, and you'll have the links to them. So Alberta Agriculture and Forestry has developed a checklist and action plan to help you determine your readiness for co-packing. So readiness for co-packing is really important. So just understanding all those steps that you'll need to check over, as Marguerite had mentioned, and part of step 1. So some of the things that you would need to determine as part of that is sort of those quality definition of your finished products. So that would be, understanding some of those parameters and specifications that you would need for the quality in order for your finished product. You don't want to be unhappy with the product at the end, or it doesn't meet your customer expectations. So being really clear on that too. So planning your needs around that. Product development, who's doing recipe formulation and scale up formulations. So indeed, the co-packer might need to retool your entire formulation to scale it up. So it's quite different doing it at a small scale, handmade perhaps, and moving that into a larger scale. The pierogi or dumpling that you'd be making perhaps wouldn't even work at all in the type of equipment being used. So any special product storage requirements, so freezing is going to be something you want to ask about, or some chilling for some raw ingredients. Certifications and allergens, as we talked about. And perhaps what happens with rejected batches. So what constitutes a recall or a rejection of that batch? And then perhaps, what happens and whose responsibility around that? Because obviously that could come at a cost too, because all those ingredients going in. But you do want that product to be perfect on the other side. And then with that, perhaps what is the recall process that they'll be using to, if anything does happen with your product in the marketplace, whose responsibility around the recall process? So perhaps it's something that you want to take control of and things like that. So there's lots of things in this checklist for you guys to take a peek at. So even shipping requirements, that cost per unit that you're hoping for, who's responsible for sourcing ingredients, some of those regulatory compliance pieces, and then of course perhaps the insurance and these things that are less fun, insurance and who keeps records, because that's going to be important. So if you go back later and say, well, you should have been tracking that, or that should have been part of your insurance plan, that would be a difficult thing to do in retrospect. You'd hope that all those things were sort of done in the beginning and that you have all those things laid out. Great, so step 3, identifying those potential co-packers. So that's what everyone's excited about. Everyone starts to Google a little bit, and probably everyone Googles Copacker, Alberta, and nothing really comes up, or something comes up that's not something that you're looking for. So identifying a list of co-packers that perhaps, or co-packers or processors who have capacity and match your company needs would be important. You'll want to narrow your search and identify those co-packers that match your product and perhaps the values that you share within your company. So it might be difficult to partner with a co-packer that has varying values. And what I mean by that is maybe they don't take such importance on sustainability or perhaps packaging or ingredient sourcing. And that's fine, because that's not their business. But if that's important to you, that's going to be hard to align on that. So understanding that, looking for companies when you're looking at their business, that they match that sort of product, process, manufacturing needs, as well as those values. So you can find a co-packer in several ways. You can tap your network, of course, so talking to people who work in the industry, other people who have access to co-packing, talking to other processors who have a similar product. And then if they don't have anything for you, ask for referrals and just continue to dig around a little bit. We can definitely ask our team. So our team, that's what we do. We probably get perhaps a dozen or so inquiries per month about seeking co-packing services. So we understand very well what's going on in our province, and we can hopefully make some connections as long as it's not too specific of a product. So you can definitely ask us, Marguerite and I, or anyone that you're working with in your agriculture and forestry team. And you can also connect through the Ag Info Center, and that's on your screen, 310 Farm. And that's a way that you can sort of talk to someone right away and get some questions asked. Of course, you can use online directories. So we have an online directory, which is just all the processors that have listed themselves in our Alberta Food Processing Directory. So you can go through, you can look by products. So if you're looking for deep fried chicken wings or whatever it is, you can look through there and see if you can find someone who's doing a like product, because they likely have the equipment that you're looking for. And then also the Alberta Food Processors Association directory. So the Alberta Food Processors Association has a membership directory. So it's those who are members and who are in Alberta doing processing. And you can find them and sort of ask if they would be able to do some co-pack for you as well. Great. So step 4 is selecting and evaluating. So that's going to be exciting. You've done some phone calls, you've talked to some people. I find that the co-packer sometimes is a bit fatigued by hearing from seekers. So that's why we were trying to build that readiness, build the pieces that you know what to ask and that you know your product. So it's really, when you're chatting with them, is selecting that right fit. If they seem a little bit impatient, then maybe it may or may not fit, right? So select a manufacturer that makes a similar type of product to yours and meets your list. So that's sort of what we were talking about previously. Once you have that list, you can start contacting them and get your checklist out and the action plan, so you know what to ask that co-packer, all those things about food safety and regulations and certifications, all those good things. And you also wanted to sort of discuss what else that they make. So when you're talking to them, you can ask them what other products that they make. Is that going to be a conflict? So are they also producing a noodle that has gluten in it and your product is a gluten-free item? So that could be challenging. You could also ask them if they also have other co-pack arrangements. So have they done co-pack for other companies? So that's a good sign too. So many of them have, but it might be challenging to be the first one. Not saying that it can't happen, but is their focus really on co-packing private label, or are they doing their own thing all the time? But there's been some great examples of people who have never done co-packing and then have done a great job working with seekers. So just to encourage you that, do talk to people still and ask that question. So, if your product, like I mentioned, is a premium product and the co-packer has a lower value end product, which is just fine, so they produce at volume, and your product is premium, so saying that might be a different mindset and might be challenging to meet on those values. If you have a premium product, premium ingredients, it's very handmade, that could be a challenge as well. And do they have even capacity for new co-pack relationships? So when we do talk to the co-packers within our province, or those processors with extra capacity, many of them are at capacity and unable to sort of bring in anyone new. But that doesn't say you can't say, well, when could that fit within your production schedule? So there are some ways of just keeping that relationship alive even. So you can ask them about lead times. You can ask them about the storage and who does what. Can they do some of that storage for you? Because some of them don't. They want you to just produce your product and move it out of their facility. You can ask them about the type of packaging and shipping that they have. So you can see that there's lots and lots of questions that you can ask them over time, and you've got your checklist, so you have all these things. The next step that's really important is visiting the facility, and I think that that will give you a good idea as to some of their values that they have, how the staff is being treated, their hygiene processes, the food safety program they have in place. It'll be apparent if it's a good alignment with what you believe in as well, and you can really understand if they have a willingness to meet your expectations and sort of good on that way. I hesitate when some companies say, no, you can't visit our facility, because it's sort of saying, well, what are you going to hide? But I think if they have some proprietary equipment or something that they're doing that's specific, they may not be able to invite you in. But it's still important to hopefully get that right, to be able to tour the facility. So finding a right partner that is large enough for you to grow is also a really good thing to know. So if you do have a co-pack relationship, things are going well. If you exceed their capacity that they have for you, then you're going to be looking for another co-packer. So there is a bit of a balance in, finding a co-packer that will meet your perhaps small volumes that you're looking to do. And then two, someone that once you get to a larger volume, that they can actually accommodate those things. So there might be a co-packer in the beginning that's great because they have, let's say, Alberta Health Services facility. You don't need a federal facility at the time. They can do your capacity at low volumes, but you might need to find a co-packer that's a little bit larger, and it might not even be in this province, right? So I've worked with co-packers in the past that were in Canada, the US, and international. So there's all these challenges that come with working with those partners, but it worked for us at the time. So if you have hopefully find a partner that is large enough for you to grow, it does have a lot of value to that. So food safety is paramount. It's something that you are in the business of making a safe food product, not just a delicious food product. So I think that many of my clients are so excited to get to market that food safety is less fun, but it is very, very important. That Canada is a highly regulated environment. So it's important that food safety is the cornerstone of your business. And with that, hopefully your co-packer, it's a cornerstone of their business, and in likelihood it is. So looking at what some potential food safety programs are that your co-packer may have, what marketplace that you're looking at entering into will dictate what kind of food safety plan that you'll require. So for instance, if it was Costco, for instance, that was looking at selling your product, they will require a high level of food safety. So that's what that GFSI is, certification on your screen. So GFSI is the Global Food Safety Initiative. So that's a really high safety food safety system. But maybe your customer doesn't need that, and that's great. So all they will require perhaps is having a HACCP plan. A HACCP plan is a Hazard Assessment Critical Control Plan, which is a preventative control measures that are put into place in a production facility to mitigate all those risks. So we could think about, there's no glass going into the food product, and of course there's no biologics, there's no bacteria that are in the system. So it's just checks and balances to make sure that the food is safe. So many of you are probably seeking a co-packer because you've heard from your retailer, oh, you need a HACCP plan, or you need to have a preventative control plan in place. So, understanding what HACCP means so that when you go visit a potential co-packer, you have a good idea and you can kind of speak the language. It's not that you need to know all the ins and outs, but that you know. So it's just understanding sort of what you need. Here are some kind of tips that we have for looking for it. Some co-packers will share their third-party audits. So audits are things that the certifying body for organics might have had, or a customer has done a third-party audit, and then you can get an idea as to the health of their food safety plan and if they've passed. Also kind of looking at their allergen controls, so with the gluten-free, peanut-free, and all those other good things in process. And then when you're kind of working with a co-packer in the beginning and you have some initial runs, the suggestion is that you request samples of each batch, and that you can kind of obviously taste the product and see what it's like, and that you really like it, because there are some challenges of scaling up, as you know. But even with doing some lab tests yourself, so taking that sauce that you've made, the beautiful sauce that your co-packer made, and then taking that to a lab and getting some micro metals and allergen tests before that product gets launched into the marketplace. So it safeguards you. So you want to have that mutual safeguard. You definitely expect that your lead time and transit time will be increased. These are just kind of those things that are going to happen if you're working with a co-packer. It's out of your control. Your lead times, transit times will be increased, and really things will be delayed. And then, for food safety, definitely requesting that documentation from regulatory bodies. So I've had that in the past where, there was a HACCP audit done, and there was a certificate talking about the HACCP, but we found out that it was a fraudulent document. So that's a good thing to check. That doesn't often happen, but just a good thing for you to remember to check into those things. This is probably what all of the seekers that talk to us ask about, and it's probably the most difficult one to answer, is pricing. So pricing, how much is this going to cost, and what is it going to cost per unit, and what can I anticipate for approximate costs, like those questions that we get. Pricing will really depend on the service that you require. Food processing is a very, very high input. It's a high cost thing to do with very, very slim margins. So kind of understanding that these co-packers aren't there to hose anybody. They're not out there to just rake in the money. They're taking a very small margin on your co-pack services, but they are a business that's just in the business of not, shutting down and what keeps the lights on. So being okay with understanding that, there's somebody that wants to make some money for their efforts as well. So as I say, you really want to get started in the beginning talking about understanding yourself and what you require, understanding what the co-packer requires. So understanding each of those services that you require will determine that price. Most co-packers will be unable to give you a price in the beginning because there are so many facets and so many cogs that will determine how that price changes. So really understanding, each of those areas of where prices come in will be important. So here's some good questions here to, ask about price breakdown and who manages costs. What is the minimum notice for changes in price? How is labor involved? Are you providing some labor? Are they providing some labor? And all of these good things it's important to ask. So just kind of in the end is costs can be high and be okay with that. So Marguerite did a great job of saying perhaps your business isn't ready if you can't afford to have a co-packer working with you because you can't afford that margin. So costs can be quite high working with a co-packer, but we also know the benefits. And we know that the benefits are that you can get access to new marketplaces and produce in volume and perhaps stop stirring the pot all the time. You can donate your time to doing other things. And just really being prepared to know all of those ins and outs.
So we're going to move on to the best practices now. And as with any business engagement, co-packing has some common best practices for both us who seek a co-packing service and also for the co-packer themselves. Come on, turn. There we go. So the first one and the most important one is you want to create a win for both parties. You want to find that balance between what you want and need, and you want to communicate clear expectations that both yourself and your co-packer can manage to ensure that both businesses are set up for successful and profitable path forward. You want both parties to walk away from the deal feeling like they both won. So remember, as Lindsay said, it's like a marriage. You got to really work on the relationship, and that's the most important piece. And then you want to provide your co-packer, with accurate information on what you need. So being a good client is also important for the co-packing best practices. You want to, as I mentioned, you want to clearly communicate expectations, write down instructions for what is the recipe, are there certain ingredients, certain processes that are really important to you. Have them down and share that with your co-packer. You want to work together to solve challenges. So as things come up, talk together and see if you can come up with a solution. Try to be on site for a production run or hire someone that could help you. Often that comes from the co-packer themselves. They're dedicating an employee to work on your production runs and be the lead on your production. So you'll be working with that person. Making sure that you pay on time is a really good best practice. And as Lindsay has mentioned, with the pricing and the costing, understand the real cost to processing your product, and submit accurate forecasts for the the volumes, the sales, the annual sales, things that will help you and the processor make sure that everything is scheduled correctly and the timing happens. And then knowing your regulations and what you need to do in certain incidents, that's really important. So resources. Alberta Agriculture and Forestry has 2 publications that are available on Open Government for the industry on co-packing, as well as resources and tools that staff like Lindsay and I use for the one-to-one coaching to help you be ready for that co-packing experience. So the first one, Co-packing Food Industry, What to Know, provides a good background on co-packing along with more details for those who are seeking a co-packing service. And the Getting Into Co-packing is a resource for those thinking of expanding their operations and offering services of co-packing. And then, as Lindsay also mentioned, we have developed the checklist and action plan for businesses who are looking for a co-packer to help them make sure they're ready and they have all the information that they need for making that choice and having that win-win. And following today's webinar, we planned a second in the series with an industry panel, and the industry panel will include those processors, producers who have been using a co-packer as well as a co-packer, and they're going to share their own experiences and tips regarding succeeding at co-packing relationships. And the webinar is going to take place on December 9th from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. And now I'm going to, Dolores is going to add information to any of the follow-up webinar with some of these links and these resources. And now I'm going to turn it back to Dolores to lead the questions from the audience.
All right, thank you, ladies. So one question is, this is a quick and easy answer for you guys. Will the links checklists be provided to participants?
The action plan and checklist, yes, we're going to, it's a PDF, so we'll provide that with the follow-up email.
All right. Next question is, what is a common challenge that you hear people say that they face when looking for a co-packer?
I think the most common one is actually the finding a co-packer in Alberta, because you know, we don't have a directory that's totally targeted at co-packers and increasing that networking between seekers and co-packers. So I think that is one of the most common challenges. The other one is for very unique product development questions. We have limited availability or capacity in Alberta for some of those. So that's a challenge. And then we're helping companies look outside of Alberta. So for example, canning. We have no canning capacity within Alberta. So then we are going to BC to help find processors who can co-pack and work with a company who wants to make a canned product, for example.
All right, thank you. This is just a follow-up to the checklist. It's like, the question is, will the PDF be in an email to the registrants? And yes, it will. You may not get it today, but you will definitely have it by the end of this week. Next question was, will the follow-up webinar include distribution information?
So distribution information in regards to working with distributors. I mean, I guess we need some follow-up questions. So is it working with a co-packer that has existing distribution? So maybe just a few more details and we're happy to answer that.
Okay, I will wait for them to, working with a distributor.
Oh yeah, for sure. So Marguerite and I have a lot of information on working with a distributor. It's a bit of a different topic to co-packing, but for sure it's intricately linked as well. So we're happy to help talk about working with distributors. We do have some fact sheets that we're working on about it, but we have a lot of best practices when you're seeking a distributor, how to find the right one, and then obviously making the relationship work with the distributor. So yeah, absolutely, just connect with us. Our contact information is at the end of the slides. I know some of you, the slides look like they're paused on slide 17, but at the end there is our contact information.
All right. And then Marguerite had mentioned about the follow-up webinar. At this point, it is not scheduled, so I do not have a link that I can send out to anyone. We're just working on which software will work best for us. So until we figure that out, there is no registration link for it, just so that you know, when you're not wondering why we're not sending that as well. At this point, ladies, we have no further questions. Lindsay and Marguerite, do you have anything else you would like to share?
Yeah, I will mention a little bit about keeping things in writing and contracts. So that's another question. So when we do this co-packing best practices workshop, it is actually a workshop and it's almost a full day. So the information that we provided today is a really high level showcase of, what information that there is, but there is a lot more information that we have to share, and contracts come up often as well. So, looking at how do we build a good contract that's mutually beneficial? How do we make sure that, everything's in writing? So some of those other things that, we're happy to share as well. The resources that we'll provide to you have some information on those building the contracts. So that would be a contract is when you're ready to work with that co-packer. And then, often case it's engaging with a lawyer to sort of help to make sure that that's something that also protects you. So is there some exclusivity? Is there some, exit terms that it may not be super beneficial? So for instance, that your formulation is now owned by that co-packer, and that does happen, and that's okay because they have actually put a lot of effort into that formulation. But is there a clause in there that allows you to take that formulation and take it somewhere else to scale it up, for instance? So there's all those little things that come into play. But it's a very rich topic. It's something that we've found that Albertans in general are clamoring to get information on. We've definitely seen, over the last 10 years, the increase in the number of inquiries on co-packing. So it's an exciting time. So co-packing allows people to expand, and they want to, get to new marketplaces. So for me, the more I see people seeking co-packing, the more that I see that our food system is getting stronger and people are looking at expanding. So it's a really exciting time to look on that. So, look forward to your questions as well, and keep asking questions, and then happy to sort of, if you guys want to work one-on-one afterwards.
All right, and since you did that talking, we have more questions if you want to move with the questions.
Okay, and then I was just going to add to Lindsay's, since she was talking about contracts and non-disclosures and competitive intelligence. We worked with WD in February to bring in Jameson Glenford Jameson to Alberta for co-packers, and the resource that he developed is almost ready for public release. So we'll be able to have that as another resource for both the people who are looking at offering co-packing services.
All right, thank you. So here's our next question. I found a very good co-packer in BC. Any insight with working in BC and bringing the product to Alberta?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll answer that one. A lot of my clients have had to do co-packing outside of province, and it's absolutely fine. Sometimes you can't find that equipment in Alberta. And I sense that hesitation because it makes it more challenging. There's more, shipping the product back and getting samples and all those things. I've seen it work really, really well. So I myself have had co-packers in the US and globally. You have to FedEx lots of samples. You might have to be present for the first number of runs. So there are ways to make that a very successful relationship. And so I would encourage you to say, yeah, that, do that if it seems to work. It is going to be a bit more complicated. And if there's some challenges or some hiccups, that might be tougher to manage. But, BC does have different types of processors. So if that's where you need to go, and that's perfectly fine.
All right, and Margaret, you took your presentation off if you want to put that back up.
Oh.
Next question is, can you provide some more information about the different food safety certifications and how to go about getting them?
Oh, for sure. So how to go about getting them. So for the most part, when someone is looking at entering the food processing industry, the minimum that they would require to sell into retail or into food service or online would be Alberta Health Services. So Alberta Health Services provides some food handling permits as well as food handling courses that people are required to do in order to produce food. So I might be kind of maybe giving you more information that you need because I don't know all the details of that question. So you may not need that if you're working with a co-packer because they will have their own certifications and regulations in place. In order to sell beyond Alberta, you would need, in some cases, for high-risk products, a federal facility. So a federal facility is quite in depth, and it requires a much deeper level of food safety system, so including that HACCP, which we talked about. The facility itself needs to be very different than a provincial facility in regards to HVAC, or its air handling units, drainage, sanitation, staffing, all sorts of good things. So I think that, if you want it in the chat box to just detail what you mean by that exactly, but there's lots of different levels to food safety. Oftentimes your customer will tell you what they need. So let's say if you're working with Sobeys and they will say, yes, your item is looking like a high-risk product. We will need you to have a HACCP plan, or we'll need you to have a food safety audit. So, that will kind of let you in on, oh boy, I need to start digging in on what I need. The Alberta Agriculture and Forestry website has lots of information on food safety. So food safety is a pretty big deal. We want everyone to be making safe food products. So, do click on those resources as well, or we're happy to share them with you. So if I haven't answered your question correctly, do go back and define that a bit better.
All right, thank you. Your next question is, if the product is for the U.S. market, what would the challenges be if co-packing happened in the States?
So again, it goes back to that distance, that you're a little bit further away. But some of the challenges that would be, so I think what I'm hearing from the question is that your marketplace is in the US and you have a co-packer in the US, which is really great. So I would recommend that. That makes things way easier. Then you're not shipping things across the border. I've had lots of food products get stuck at the border. So it's just really great to have a co-packer in the States for the US marketplace. The benefits also include that they understand what FDA requires and USDA requires for regulations. You're not having any of those challenges in there. So other things that, it might be for you to understand a bit of what FDA and USDA requires. So really that end product, your end result of that co-packer, your product, is yours. It's still your responsibility. So you understanding all of those regulatory pieces that come into play in order to make sure that you're in compliance of that. So that might be making sure you're in compliance with labeling requirements, as well as that food safety side of things. Distribution can be a lot easier in the US as well. So there's a lot more partners, a lot more players, and a lot more trucks on the road. So that helps things as well. So there are some great benefits of doing your co-processing in the country that you're working in. But then it goes back to make sure you're doing lots of samples for each batch sent to you, that you're doing your own lab work to make sure that everything's looking awesome. You're flying down there and creating that really great relationship. So as Marguerite mentioned, is if you're married at long distance, the relationship might start to break down. So be sure that you're flying down there and connecting with them and engaging to make sure that everything's going according to plan.
And then also, if you're using a co-packer, either in another province or the US, it goes back to that clear expectations and writing down specific instructions, making sure you have something in writing, really making sure you understand all the costs that they're going to charge you. Those things become so paramount when you're farther away from your co-packer.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Next question. Are resources on building a contract available on your website?
That would be a no. There used to be.
Yeah, so yes and no. So we do have a lot of great things that you'll need to include in that contract. So some lists of things that need to be sort of outlined and things that need to be in writing. As Marguerite mentioned, we have had a lawyer come in February and outline what a contract should look like for that co-packer. So there are some great tools. There's not a lot on the internet. I agree with you. You can't just go and Google co-packing contracts. Wouldn't that be great? And template. So it does create some challenges. There are lawyers that are awesome and that are not super expensive, that are happy to look at the contract to make sure that it makes sense. For the most part, the co-packer will provide the contract. So it's really up to you to understand each of those items and then make sure that it fits with both sides of the party.
All right, thank you.
And that's also a relatively new area for co-packing, because traditionally it used to be on a handshake. And now, as there's been different disputes in the media and in the law firms, the written agreement has become so important.
Perfect. Okay, next question is there any government funding for co-packing in 2020 or even 2021?
Well, there has been CAP funding, but for 2021, it's closed. All the funds have been allocated, and so we'll have to wait until announcements for April 2021 for the new year. So being prepared and reading what you would need to make an application ahead of time would be important. And then you can always check with Lindsay and myself or anyone else in the Alberta Agriculture team for if there's outsource fundings that aren't under the CAP program. There might be some other ones.
Perfect.
Yeah,
And just
a
go ahead,
quick,
Lindsay.
yeah, so just to clarify, funds for 2020 have, and for the first period of 2021 are done. So those grant programs are closed, they're oversubscribed. But as Marguerite said, the grants open up in April again. And so it's just getting all of your homework done to know what you knew. So co-packing in some ways is supported by the Canadian Agricultural Partnership. We can send you the link to that grant program. And a really great suggestion that Marguerite said is look at those grant programs, and it's probably going to be the CAP program, which is products to markets, large or small. So it's probably on that small side, which means that it's activities under $50,000. And really understanding the terms and conditions and what's eligible. And then great, I'm going to get my application all ready to go. So when that gate opens, my application goes in. So, there's lots of amazing staff to help you to define what you're going to do and make sure that it's eligible. So yes, to answer it quite simply, there are some funds that the eligibility around co-packing is a possibility to make your production runs, especially for a new product into new marketplaces.
All right, thank you. And so just a comment for you ladies. Thank you for anticipating my questions and what language concepts are meaningful. So kudos to you. So we have no further questions at this point. So I would just like to say a huge thank you to Lindsay and Marguerite for your presentation today. To everyone on the line, I would just like to say thank you very much for attending our webinar. There will be a survey that will appear on your screen when the webinar concludes. We would really appreciate if you took seriously. It'll take you less than 2 minutes to answer the few questions we have. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Take care.